He wasn't born a monster, but the streets turned him into one. A kid with cold eyes, no fear, and a talent for violence that made grown men step aside. He climbed from alleyway beatings to becoming the most feared enforcer in his city, until one mistake exposed him to the one enemy even the underworld feared. But instead of destroying him, they used him. And that secret, hidden in sealed files and whispered in backrooms, gave him a power no killer should ever have. Because once he served two masters, someone was going to lose control. And that's where this story takes a turn you won't believe. Gregory Scarpa was born in a place where childhood ended early and innocence didn't survive long. Brooklyn in the 1930s was a furnace, hot with sweat, sin, and the steam rising from the docks where men broke their backs for a week's wage while gangsters made more in an evening than honest men made in a month. It was a neighborhood where priests blessed the children in the morning and loan sharks collected from their fathers by nightfall. A place where the mafia didn't hide in shadows, they cast them. For most kids, Red Hook was a maze of alleys and cracked sidewalks. For Greg Scarpa, it was a training ground. He was a small kid at first, thin, wiry, unremarkable. But everyone remembered his eyes. Cold. Watching. Calculating. He spoke softly, but the silence around him was always heavy, as if the air itself sensed something dangerous forming behind that quiet stare. His parents were Italian immigrants, hardworking, devout, trying to carve out a sliver of the American dream. But dreams were fragile things in Brooklyn. Fear was the sturdier currency. Greg saw the hierarchy of his world long before he understood words like power or respect. He watched the longshoremen stagger home exhausted, hands cracked and bleeding, earning pennies unloading cargo. And then he saw the other men, the ones in tailored coats and polished shoes, who glided down the streets with an ease that felt supernatural. Men who never rushed. Men who never apologized. Men who everyone stepped aside for. The wise guys. They looked like the heroes of a world Gregory wanted to belong to. He saw how people spoke to them, with careful respect or cautious silence. He saw how shopkeepers forced smiles when those men entered, how mothers pulled their children close and looked away. He didn't know the words for it yet, but he understood the feeling. Fear was strength. Strength was freedom. His first act of violence wasn't planned. It didn't need to be. He was 10, maybe 11, when an older boy shoved him during a game on the street. Greg didn't shout or push back. He simply followed the boy home, waited until he was alone, and beat him with a broken broom handle. No flare of rage. No screaming. Just cold, calculated blows delivered with eerie calm. When neighbors dragged him off the bleeding child, Greg didn't struggle. He just stared at them, breathing steady, expression blank. That stare unsettled adults more than the beating itself. Something was wrong with the Scarpa boy, they whispered. But in the neighborhoods ruled by the mafia, a boy who could hurt without remorse wasn't broken. He was noticed. By his teens, Greg had drifted effortlessly into the world that had always called to him. He ran numbers, delivered messages, watched the doors of social clubs for men who spoke softly but ruled loudly. He was the kid who didn't flinch when things got rough. The kid who didn't look away when someone got slapped, stomped, or pistol-whipped for stepping out of line. And soon, he was the kid who did the hitting. Violence wasn't a shock to him. It was a dialect he picked up quickly. Pain was a conversation. Fear was persuasion. Silence was victory. Older mobsters started using him for errands that required a young face and a ruthless temperament. A debt needed collecting? Send Greg. A stubborn gambler needed persuading? Greg would talk to him. And people listened to Greg in a way they didn't listen to other boys his age. There was something about him. An absence, a hollow space behind his smile. A void that made men twice his size think twice before testing him. By 17, he'd been arrested for the first time, an assault so vicious that the victim needed days in the hospital. The cops expected tears, fear, maybe even denial. They got none of it. Greg sat calmly as the officers shouted questions, as if he were discussing the weather. The case fell apart when the victim refused to testify. People in the neighborhood understood the math. You talk, you disappear. And the kid who delivered the beating looked like someone capable of making people disappear. Word spread fast. A new name drifted through the bars, the pool halls, the smoky back rooms. The Grim Reaper. It began as a joke, a dark nickname tossed around by men who thought they were laughing at a kid trying to play gangster. But jokes have a way of turning into warnings. And warnings have a way of becoming truths. Especially when the boy attached to them starts acting the part. Scarpa didn't mind the name. He didn't mind much of anything. He simply kept doing what he'd always done, climbing, pushing, hurting, surviving. By his early 20s, the Colombo family took notice. He wasn't just another tough kid. He was efficient, controlled, reliable. He didn't bluster like other young wannabes. He didn't brag about the fights he won or boast about the men he taught lessons. He simply did what was asked, quickly, quietly, completely. Men like that don't stay foot soldiers for long. But even as he stepped deeper into the mafia's world, collecting debts, running rackets, and learning the unwritten rules of Cosa Nostra, something else was growing inside him. A second identity. A second hunger. Because Scarpa wasn't just chasing respect. He wasn't just chasing money. He was chasing control. Control over people. Control over fear. Control over life and death. And that hunger was leading him down a path even the mafia didn't expect. A path no one dared to walk. A path so dangerous, so unthinkable. It violated the sacred blood oath of every made man before him. Before Gregory Scarpa became a legend, before he became one of the bloodiest killers in mafia history, before the streets whispered his name like a curse, he would become something far worse than a monster. He would become a man with two masters. And neither of them would ever truly own him. Welcome my beautiful family and friends to my YouTube channel. Please click on subscribe, like, comment, and share this video. Thank you specially for sticking around to this very moment. Now back to the story. Fear never controlled Gregory Scarpa. Power did. And by the early 1960s, Scarpa had carved out a reputation in Brooklyn that was equal parts whisper, rumor, and nightmare. He was the man who collected debts others were too scared to chase. The man who solved problems before anyone even admitted they existed. The man who looked at violence the way a craftsman looks at his tools. But even monsters make mistakes. And Scarpa's mistake was simple. He got sloppy. One night, during a routine shakedown, the wrong federal agent caught sight of him. The name Gregory Scarpa started circulating through FBI memos like smoke. Thin at first, then impossible to ignore. The Bureau had been hunting the mafia's shadow figures for years, but Scarpa was something different. He didn't hide behind legitimate businesses. He didn't pretend to be a respectable citizen. He was unapologetically violent in a way that made even experienced agents uneasy. So when the FBI finally closed in on him, charges prepared, cuffs ready, the man they arrested wasn't trembling or defiant. He simply stared at them with that same cold, unreadable calm he'd carried since childhood, as if nothing that happened next could surprise him. Scarpa wasn't scared of prison. He'd grown up around men who went in and out of cells like it was part of the family tradition. But prison meant limits. Prison meant vulnerability. Prison meant loss of control. And control was the one thing he could never allow anyone to take from him. The day of his interrogation, the agents expected a stone wall. They got something else entirely, Scarpa leaning back, arms crossed, evaluating them as if they were the ones on trial. The room felt off balance, the power shifting in ways the FBI couldn't explain yet. Then Scarpa made an offer. Not with humility, not with desperation, but with the cool confidence of a man negotiating a business deal. He told them he could give them information. Names. Rackets. Secrets whispered in back rooms where federal ears never reached. The agents should have laughed. They should have walked out. The FBI had procedures, ethics, protocols, rules about the kinds of criminals you could use and the kinds you couldn't. Scarpa was definitely the kind they shouldn't. But the Bureau was hungry. They were losing ground to the mafia. Losing cases. Losing informants to bullet wounds and shallow graves. They needed access. They needed a key that could unlock the dark walls of organized crime. And Scarpa, cold, brutal, calculating Scarpa, realized he could be that key. The negotiations didn't happen in a boardroom. They happened in whispers, hallway conversations, and meetings after hours where no one signed anything official. Scarpa didn't need a lawyer. He didn't need a contract. All he needed was a back-channel agreement, a promise that protected him from the consequences of his own violence. It happened so quietly that even some federal agents never knew. A handshake, a nod, a secret file opened under the classification top echelon informant. Scarpa was no ordinary snitch. He wasn't a corner gambler flipping to save his hide. He was a made man in the Colombo family, a soldier forged in violence who had never once shown fear. That kind of informant was unthinkable. A breach of Mafia code, so severe it defied imagination. And yet, here it was. The FBI wrote it down in careful bureaucratic language. The Mafia never saw the paperwork, but they felt the consequences. Scarpa didn't flip because he felt remorse for the men he'd beaten, shot, or buried. He didn't flip because he was threatened. He didn't flip because he wanted to walk away from the life. He flipped because it was an opportunity. A way to get the FBI out of his way. A way to secure protection without ever appearing weak. A way to feed federal agents crumbs while eating full meals from Mafia profits. He flipped because it made him untouchable. As long as Scarpa produced information, real or carefully crafted, the FBI would keep him insulated from the charges he deserved. And as long as the FBI insulated him, the Mafia viewed him as a high-value earner, a man protected by invisible forces no one could explain. Both sides saw him as an asset. Both sides believed they could use him. But they underestimated him. Scarpa wasn't loyal to the Bureau. Scarpa wasn't loyal to the Mafia. Scarpa was loyal to Scarpa. The informant meetings were never casual affairs. Always secret. Always tense. Scarpa would arrive wearing his usual calm, sit across from federal agents who had no idea how deeply they were being manipulated, and talk in half-truths, riddles, and veiled suggestions. He never admitted to murder. Never confessed to anything that could lock him away. Instead, he delivered just enough to keep the FBI hooked, information useful, but never damaging to himself. For the FBI, he became too valuable. That phrase appeared in memos, circled in red pencil, underlined by supervisors who didn't want to lose their prize source. Arresting Scarpa would ruin investigations. Jailing him would destroy pipelines of intelligence. Better to keep him free, they reasoned, to let him operate in the underworld where he could continue feeding them insight. But the agents who worked closest to Scarpa knew the truth instinctively. They weren't controlling him.
He was controlling them.
Meanwhile, back in Brooklyn, the Mafia couldn't understand why Scarpa moved the way he did, untouched, unarrested, unstoppable. Cops raided other crews, but never his. Rivals went down in indictments that somehow missed Scarpa entirely. He walked through federal pressure like a ghost. To the wise guys, it meant one thing. Scarpa had friends in high places. And in the Mafia world, a man with federal friends was a man too dangerous to cross. It was perfect for him. A dual shield. A double mask. He could kill with one hand and get paid by the government with the other. He could offer information about one enemy to the FBI, then eliminate another enemy on the street, protected by the very agents who should have been hunting him. Every informant is a traitor. Every traitor has reasons. But Scarpa wasn't a traitor in the traditional sense. He didn't betray the Mafia out of fear or guilt. He didn't betray the FBI by withholding truths out of panic. He simply refused to belong to anyone. He was a killer with two masters. But in his mind, neither master ever mattered. They were tools, just like the guns he carried, the knives he hid, the silence he commanded. And in the darkness of that secret pact, Gregory Scarpa became something rare. A man who didn't just survive the Mafia. A man who didn't just deceive the FBI. A man who used both, coldly, methodically, to rise even higher in the shadows. A man loyal to none. A man feared by all. Gregory Scarpa's deal with the FBI didn't slow him down. It unleashed him. Most informants cooperate because they want to survive. Most informants give information because they're scared. Scared of prison, scared of rivals, scared of losing everything. Scarpa wasn't scared of anything. He wasn't cooperating to live. He was cooperating to kill. The moment he became a top echelon informant, he realized he had stumbled onto something extraordinary, a loophole in morality so deep, so dark, that no one had ever dared to exploit it before. The FBI needed him. The Mafia worshipped him. And Scarpa understood the mathematics of power better than any man around him. He fed the Bureau intelligence with the same precision he used in murder, calculated, controlled, never giving more than necessary. A whisper here, a name there, just enough to keep the pipeline open, just enough to keep agents filing reports that called him valuable, cooperative, essential. And while those agents typed, Greg Scarpa was out on the street making bodies disappear. His killing didn't slow. It accelerated. One week, he was extorting a local bookmaker who had fallen behind on payments, dragging the man into a basement, breaking bones methodically, like tuning a piano. The next week, he was hijacking a truck on the Brooklyn waterfront, pistol-whipping a driver and tossing him into the East River. On Tuesday, he met with his FBI handler. On Wednesday, he beat a rival so badly the cops couldn't recognize the face. Scarpa lived in two worlds, one in daylight, one in darkness, and both were feeding him. The FBI sent him envelopes of cash, informant payments, expenses, bonuses for good intel. To the Bureau, it wasn't corruption. It was protocol. They were rewarding a source who gave them access to the invisible world of the Mafia. They didn't ask how Scarpa gathered his information. They didn't want to know. Meanwhile, the Mafia paid him for hitting enemies, collecting debts, and enforcing rules with brutality no one else dared to use. 2 employers. 2 paychecks. 1 monster. Scarpa's genius wasn't just violence. It was deception. He learned to speak to FBI agents in the same calm tone he used when threatening men with weapons. He filled their notebooks with details that made him look essential, who was skimming money, who was stepping out of line, who was losing favor. But he always protected himself. He always protected his own crew. He always made sure the information he gave hurt someone else, never him. And the FBI accepted it.
Every
single
time.
Agents wrote memos. Supervisors reviewed them. Nobody asked the obvious questions. How does Scarpa know all this? Why is he never arrested at scenes of violence? Why is he always one step ahead of our investigations? The truth was simple. They didn't want to lose him. Scarpa was their golden source. That phrase was whispered in briefing rooms like prayer. He was the informant who opened doors. The one who gave them breakthroughs. The one who made them look good to Washington. And when a source makes you look good, you don't question him too hard. Some agents could feel something was wrong. It clung to Scarpa like a second skin. This aura of quiet brutality, this calm that felt more like numbness. When he walked into a meeting, it felt less like a man entering a room and more like a storm gathering behind closed windows. But suspicion doesn't stand a chance against convenience. The Bureau needed wins. Scarpa delivered wins. So the system bent around him. There were moments, brief, flickering moments, when the FBI glimpsed the truth. A police report that matched Scarpa's timeline too perfectly. A missing person last seen with one of Scarpa's associates. A crime scene that suggested a level of violence only a handful of men were capable of. Those moments were supposed to spark an investigation. Instead, they sparked silence. Supervisors looked away. Memos vanished. Questions died before they were asked. Nobody wants to cut off their best informant. And Scarpa wasn't just good. He was extraordinary. He played both sides with masterful precision. He would sit with federal agents at midday, discussing mafia politics like a historian explaining ancient wars. Then he'd walk out of the meeting and drive straight to a social club where he'd organize the beating of a man who dared to disrespect him. Scarpa learned a lethal truth early in this dual life. As long as he talked, he could kill. His informant status became a shield no law enforcement officer could see, but every criminal instinctively sensed. The streets whispered that Scarpa had protection, though nobody knew from where. Rivals hesitated. Allies obeyed. Ordinary men crossed the street to avoid him. Even other mobsters thought twice before threatening him. Because Scarpa didn't just have muscle. He had the FBI. And the more the FBI gave him, the more reckless he became. He escalated from simple shakedowns to outright torture sessions. Men tied to chairs, beaten with hammers, suffocated, stabbed. He orchestrated hijackings with military-like precision. He pulled triggers himself when the situation called for it. Every time someone disappeared, Scarpa slept peacefully. Every time he handed the FBI a sliver of intel, they slept peacefully too. It was a perfect symbiosis, two predators feeding each other. But every secret relationship breeds dependency. And the FBI was sinking deeper into Scarpa's darkness without realizing they were drowning.
They needed him now.
They needed his insights. They needed the cases he made possible. And Scarpa? He needed nothing from them except permission. Permission they never said out loud, permission they never meant to give, but permission he took anyway. He believed he had immunity. He believed he had control. He believed he could kill forever, as long as the FBI kept caching his information. And in those years, Scarpa transformed into something more twisted than a mafia killer and more dangerous than a corrupt informant. He became a devil on retainer, a murderer paid by the government, a monster nurtured by the very people sworn to stop him. And as long as he kept talking, nobody dared put a hand on him. The summer of 1964 was already boiling when Mississippi went silent. 3 civil rights workers, James Chaney, Andrew Goodman, and Michael Schwerner, vanished on a dusty road outside Philadelphia, Mississippi. Their car was found burned, their tracks erased, their fate swallowed by a state ruled by fear and hatred. The Ku Klux Klan had long perfected the art of making people disappear. This time, they didn't even bother to hide the message. Outsiders weren't welcome. Justice wasn't coming. The FBI descended on Mississippi with agents, field packs, maps, and orders from the highest levels of government. But the Bureau quickly learned what local black residents had known their entire lives, that the Klan controlled not just the night, but the police forces, the judges, the sheriffs, every mechanism of power. Questioning locals meant questioning men who were wearing badges by day and hoods by night. Every door slammed shut. Every witness looked away. Every Klan member kept their lips sealed. The FBI searched rivers, woods, fields, barns. They dug through swamp mud and crawled through abandoned farmland. But Mississippi's silence was louder than gunshots. The investigation stalled. Washington grew impatient. The nation waited. The families of the missing young men tortured themselves with hope. Inside one FBI command tent, frustration turned into panic. The Bureau had resources but not access. Authority but not answers. And time was leaking away. Then someone no one agrees who brought up a name that should never have been spoken in a federal office. Gregory Scarpa. The Grim Reaper. A mafia killer. A man who made hardened criminals tremble. A man trusted by the FBI not because he was good, but because he was useful. What happened next was so quiet, so secret, that decades later it still reads like a rumor whispered in shame. But it happened. The Bureau made a decision born from desperation, fear, and a willingness to sacrifice morality for results. They flew a Mafia Hitman to Mississippi. Scarpa arrived under the cover of official silence, no paperwork, no recorded authorization, nothing but a whispered belief that the ends would justify the means. He stepped off the plane not as a criminal under arrest, but as a weapon the FBI had chosen to deploy. A weapon with no conscience. Mississippi agents didn't like it. Many didn't even know who he was. But the ones who did exchanged looks filled with dread. They understood the gravity of what was happening. The federal government was about to outsource justice to a man who didn't believe in justice at all. Scarpa was handed a target, a suspected Klan member, low-ranking but close enough to the men who knew where the bodies were buried. This man had refused to speak to the FBI. He had laughed in their faces, confident the Bureau would never break him. Not here, not in Mississippi. Scarpa took one look at him and smiled. Not a friendly smile. A predator's smile. A smile that said he'd been waiting for someone to unleash him. The FBI drove Scarpa to a remote location, an old cabin the Bureau had commandeered, far from prying eyes. No witnesses. No reporters. No questions. The agents who escorted him stayed outside. No one wanted to see what Gregory Scarpa did when the rules didn't exist. The suspect went in quiet. He did not come out the same. What happened in that cabin remains locked behind layers of secrecy, denials, and carefully worded statements. But the truth has leaked out over time, through memoirs, whispers, and the shadows of official reports. Scarpa didn't interrogate the man. He broke him. He used the techniques he'd honed in Brooklyn basements and mafia hideouts. Techniques that made grown men beg. Techniques the FBI would never admit they watched from a distance, pretending they didn't hear. Within hours, Scarpa had what the Bureau couldn't get in weeks. The Klan member gave up the location of the bodies. When agents dug through the red Mississippi earth days later and found the 3 civil rights workers buried in a crude, uneven grave, they didn't celebrate. They just stared at the ground, silent, haunted, knowing exactly why they found the bodies and exactly what it cost. Scarpa didn't wait for praise. He didn't ask for gratitude. He simply wiped his hands, walked past the agents who couldn't meet his eyes, and climbed into a waiting car like a man finishing a job he'd been paid for. The Bureau put him on a plane and sent him back north. But the monster they used didn't go home empty-handed. Because Scarpa understood something the moment the FBI called him. Something that terrified the Bureau more than any murder charge, any scandal, any headline. They needed him. They needed his darkness. They needed what he could do, what they were afraid to do. And that meant Scarpa had leverage. Real leverage. When agents cleared the cabin, one looked at the other and said a sentence that would haunt the Bureau for years. "We've crossed a line, and there's no crossing back." The FBI buried the truth deeper than the bodies they found. No official report mentions Scarpa's name. No public statement admits his involvement. No supervisor wrote the words, "We used a mafia hitman to torture a man for information." It all vanished under an avalanche of redactions, missing files, and careful silence. But Scarpa didn't forget. Because Scarpa understood the power of secrets better than anyone. He realized what the FBI had revealed in that desperate moment. They were afraid of failure. More afraid of failure than they were afraid of him. And fear is power. From that day forward, Scarpa walked with a new confidence, not just in the streets of Brooklyn, but in the halls of justice. He had seen the Bureau's weakness. He had seen how far they'd go. He had seen the line they were willing to erase. And he knew, without a doubt, that he owned them now. The Grim Reaper returned home with a silent victory carved into his mind. If the FBI could use him once, they could use him again. And once a monster is unleashed by the government, nothing can put it back in the cage. By the 1970s, Gregory Scarpa was no longer just a feared soldier. He wasn't even a respected capo. He had become something far more dangerous, a man no one could tell no. The Grim Reaper didn't rise through the mafia. He carved his way up. Every decade added another layer to his legend, another body to his past, another shadow stretching behind him. By the late 70s, Scarpa controlled pieces of Brooklyn that even rival bosses didn't dare touch. Loan sharking? He ran it like a bank, with blood-stained rules. Extortion? He perfected it, squeezing businesses until they couldn't breathe. Drug pipelines? He taxed everything that moved, from heroin bags to cocaine bricks. Contract killings? He didn't delegate those. Not always. Sometimes he preferred the work himself. He liked seeing the fear before the final moment.
He liked the silence after.
His crew called him the Old Man, but no one said it with affection. Scarpa commanded obedience the way a wolf commands a pack, through dominance, through unpredictability, through that aura of violence that never left him. His lieutenants respected him. His soldiers feared him. His enemies vanished. Some were found in trunks. Some in marshes. Some were never found at all. Whispers of his brutality became warnings. Warnings became stories. Stories became myth. But myth didn't explain everything. Not the invincibility. Not the way cops avoided him. Not the way investigations evaporated when his name appeared. Scarpa could walk through the fire of federal heat without getting burned, and everyone in the underworld noticed. Wise guys didn't understand why he never got arrested. Agents didn't understand how he got away with so much. Only Scarpa knew the truth. He was feeding both sides, playing them like instruments. To the Mafia, Scarpa was a fearless earner, a man who would beat a debtor in the morning, move a truckload of stolen goods by afternoon, and take a contract hit at night before going home to dinner like nothing happened. To the FBI, he was their star informant, whispering secrets, pointing them toward rival factions, offering intel wrapped in enough truth to make him indispensable. He told them who was rising, who was falling, who was skimming, who was planning a coup. He never mentioned his own rackets. He never exposed his own crimes. He never gave them anything that cost him power. Instead, he fed them pieces of everyone else. Scarpa didn't just live a double life, he weaponized it. His criminal empire grew because the FBI kept the spotlight off him. And his FBI value grew because the Mafia kept giving him secrets. A symbiosis of sin. A partnership built on corruption. A dance with the devil where everyone forgot who led. By the early 80s, Scarpa held neighborhoods like a warlord. He had bookmakers on payroll, business owners paying tribute, politicians looking the other way. His phones never stopped ringing. Fear was good for business, and he trafficked in fear better than anyone alive. Yet the more he gained, the more paranoid he became. He didn't trust rivals. He didn't trust allies. He didn't trust his crew. He trusted fear. He used violence like punctuation. Men who questioned him were beaten. Men who betrayed him were buried. Even loyal soldiers walked into his presence with careful, measured steps. One wrong word could end a career or a life. And Scarpa liked it that way. His nights were soaked in blood, not because he had to be violent, but because he chose to be. Violence was his language. Violence was his legacy. Violence was his comfort. But dual lives rot from the inside. Every lie he told the Mafia dug one more crack in the foundation. Every lie he told the FBI widened it. Every crime committed with FBI protection poisoned the relationship further. The Bureau saw him as their best source, the man who always produced, the informant too valuable to lose. But they also sensed something else, something dark, something uncontainable, something they couldn't admit to themselves. They were no longer handling Scarpa. Scarpa was handling them. Agents came and went, but Scarpa remained. Supervisors signed his payments with reluctance, but still signed them. Investigators raised questions, but those questions died in quiet hallways. Scarpa was a devil on retainer. And devils don't retire. But fate has a strange sense of timing. In the mid-1980s, Scarpa walked into a medical office for a simple procedure. Nothing dramatic. Nothing dangerous. Just an everyday test that thousands of Americans underwent without a second thought. Except the equipment was contaminated. A tiny mistake. Invisible. Irreversible. Gregory Scarpa, one of the most feared killers in Mafia history, contracted HIV. The news didn't spread. Scarpa told almost no one. The Mafia would have seen weakness. The FBI would have seen liability. His enemies would have smelled opportunity. Scarpa kept the secret buried deep, but inside he felt it. The ticking clock, the slow decay, the countdown to a death he couldn't control. And that terrified him in a way bullets never did. A dying killer becomes an unpredictable one. His paranoia sharpened to a blade. His temper grew shorter. His violence more explosive. Every slight felt like betrayal. Every rival felt like a threat. Every setback felt like a challenge to his fading authority. The Grim Reaper had spent his life delivering death with confidence. Now death was coming for him. He refused to go quietly. He wouldn't shrink. He wouldn't soften. He wouldn't surrender the empire he built with blood and secrets. Instead, he doubled down. More beatings. More hits. More risks. He became a storm without warning, a killer whose fuse shortened with each passing day, a man who fought the inevitable by making his world bleed harder, faster, louder. The Mafia saw a man becoming unhinged. The FBI saw a liability growing out of control. Scarpa saw only one thing. Everyone around him was either a tool or a target. And as the clock inside him ticked, he sharpened the line between the two. A dying Grim Reaper is still death. And in the 70s and 80s, unleashed and unstoppable, Gregory Scarpa became something no one, FBI or Mafia, knew how to restrain. He became an empire of blood walking on borrowed time. New York City had seen mafia wars before, but nothing like what erupted inside the Colombo family in the early 1990s. This wasn't business. This wasn't discipline. This wasn't the old codes of honor, rules, or quiet murders in the night. This was civil war. Two factions hunting each other like rabid dogs. Shots fired in broad daylight. Bodies collapsing on city corners where kids played stickball hours earlier. And at the center of it, feeding it, steering it, escalating it, was Gregory Scarpa, the Grim Reaper. Scarpa did not ease into the conflict. He dove in headfirst the moment the lines were drawn. One side backed the imprisoned boss, the other supported the acting boss. Alliances cracked. Trust evaporated. Streets that once belonged to one family split like fault lines. Scarpa didn't hesitate. He picked a side. And once he did, he was all in. Scarpa wasn't just another soldier fighting in the shadows. He became the conductor of chaos. He organized drive-by shootings with military precision. He set up ambushes that felt ripped straight from war zones. He pulled triggers himself, refusing to let younger men do all the dangerous work. He would fire from moving cars, from behind dumpsters, from darkened windows. Anywhere he could strike fast and vanish faster. Wise guys said Scarpa was the only man who walked into the war already smelling like violence. And then he did something far worse. He weaponized the FBI. Scarpa used his informant meetings the way generals used battle maps. When the Bureau whispered about surveillance targets, wiretaps, or intelligence from other informants, Scarpa listened carefully. Not for who the FBI was trying to protect, but who the Mafia wanted him to hit. He would sit quietly in those parked car meetings, nodding as agents fed him updates, acting like a loyal government source. Then he would step out of the car, walk around the block, and turn that intel into ammunition. Sometimes literally. If the FBI was investigating a rival faction, Scarpa used that heat as pressure, forcing his enemies into hiding, then hunting them while they were cornered. If the FBI mentioned a vulnerable associate, Scarpa made sure that associate never lived long enough to talk. The Grim Reaper realized something terrifying. With federal intel, he didn't have to guess. He didn't have to stalk. He didn't have to wait. He could kill with precision that even other mobsters found unnatural. And the FBI? They were so dependent on him, so blinded by his usefulness, that they didn't see the bodies piling up behind him. Or maybe they did, and simply chose to look away. Rumors swirled that some agents were afraid to challenge him, afraid to lose him, afraid to admit how badly they had compromised themselves. Scarpa walked into meetings with blood practically drying under his fingernails while agents scribbled in notebooks, nodded, and moved on to the next question. He was their golden source. They couldn't afford to lose him. And Scarpa knew it. The Colombo War escalated into something grotesque. Drive-bys became routine. Midday hits happened in front of fruit stands, pharmacies, bus stops. Cars screeched across intersections with gunmen hanging out the windows. Pedestrians screamed. Witnesses ducked for cover. Newspapers called it mafia warfare in modern Manhattan. Scarpa called it an opportunity. He operated like a man with nothing left to fear. His HIV diagnosis haunted him like a ticking clock, pushing him into brutal overdrive. Each day felt like a countdown, and Scarpa refused to die quietly. Every part of him, the paranoia, the fury, the hunger for control, spiked into madness. He'd call his crew in the middle of the night, ordering immediate retaliation for insults that never happened. He'd plan shootings while eating breakfast. He'd load guns in a living room while his children slept in the next room. Even his own men whispered that he had become unhinged. One soldier said, "Scarpa isn't fighting the war. He's enjoying it." Another said, "He's killing for the thrill now, not the family." Scarpa didn't deny it, because somewhere deep in his unraveling mind, violence was the one thing that still made sense. The war was the perfect storm, chaos he could shape, enemies he could eliminate, fear he could feed on. His enemies didn't stand a chance. Some were shot inside their cars before they even turned the key. Some were ambushed on their porches. Some were chased through city streets like prey. The FBI watched from a distance, helpless or unwilling, or both. They were still meeting him in parked cars, still handing him envelopes of informant payments, still taking notes while he handed them intel that conveniently aligned with his personal hit list. Some agents suspected he was using them. Some whispered concerns to supervisors. Some felt the dread in their stomachs every time his name came up. Those concerns died quietly, filed away, ignored, overshadowed by Scarpa's usefulness. The war spiraled so wildly that even the Mafia, the entire Mafia, began to murmur the same fearful sentence. He's lost control. And then the more horrifying add-on. He's killing for the thrill. Scarpa's name became something like a curse. Wise guys prayed they wouldn't cross him. His own allies kept their distance. His enemies changed routines, avoided daylight, checked their rearview mirrors like addicts. But the Reaper always found them. Every hit made him bolder. Every death made him more reckless. Every scream made him feel alive in a way his decaying body didn't. He killed with Mafia authority. He killed with FBI protection. He killed with a dying man's desperation. No one, neither side of his double life, could stop him. Not the Mafia. Not the FBI. Not the fear of death. Not the guilt of innocent blood soaking the sidewalks. Scarpa became the war. He breathed it. He bled it. He fueled it. And as the body count rose, as families mourned, as reporters wrote headlines drenched in panic, the city of New York came to understand one terrifying truth. When Gregory Scarpa fights a war, the streets drown in blood. By 1992, the Colombo War sputtered to an exhausted, bloody halt. The smoke lifted. The gunfire faded. New York, scarred and shaken, exhaled a long, trembling breath. And Gregory Scarpa, the Grim Reaper who once stalked the streets with unstoppable fury, found himself surrounded not by enemies, but by silence. The war was over, and Scarpa was no longer needed. The Mafia had fresh wounds, fresh alliances, fresh fears. They wanted stability. They wanted order. They wanted to pretend the madness of the past years could be cleaned away like blood on a sidewalk. And Scarpa? He was chaos made flesh. His usefulness had expired.
He was old now. Sick.
His body decaying from the inside, his strength fading, his mind clouded with paranoia. The illness he'd kept hidden for years, HIV from that medical mistake, had finally become a prison he couldn't escape. He still tried to project power, still growled orders, still flashed that dead-eyed stare that once froze grown men. But the truth was written in his face. Gregory Scarpa was dying. The FBI, once so desperate to keep him talking, now kept him at a distance. They didn't want him near their cars, near their offices, near their files. The same agents who once scribbled down his every whispered secret now rolled up windows when he approached. He wasn't an asset anymore. He was liability, walking, talking, coughing liability. The Mafia sensed the shift instantly. The streets always knew weakness before the bosses did. Whispers floated through social clubs and backrooms. Scarpa's done. He's slipping. He's sick, something's wrong with him. Enemies he'd terrorized for decades finally raised their heads. Men he'd beaten, robbed, humiliated, threatened. Men who'd lived years expecting Scarpa's bullet began planning revenge. And the FBI? They simply waited. They knew the end was coming. And they were prepared to pretend they'd never known him at all. Then came the day Scarpa had always believed would never arrive. The day he was arrested. There was no dramatic takedown, no shootout, no last stand. Just a tired, coughing old man let out of his home in handcuffs, snarling like a wounded animal, spitting curses at agents who refused to meet his eyes. For the first time in his life, Scarpa looked small. Not weak, small. A shadow shrinking under the weight of time. But prison wasn't his real punishment. The real punishment came when his most guarded secret erupted into the public. Court filings.
Leaks.
Whispers from inside the bureau. Then headlines. Mafia Hitman was top-flight FBI informant. The Grim Reaper worked for the government. A mob killer on the FBI payroll for decades. The revelation detonated like a bomb in the underworld. Men who once bowed their heads when Scarpa entered a room now spat his name in disgust. The Colombo family didn't merely distance themselves, they buried him socially before death could claim him physically. Scarpa had broken the sacred rule. The rule older than the Mafia itself. Older than honor. Older than blood. He had been a rat. Not a frightened drug dealer looking for a deal. Not a weak soldier caught stealing from the family. But one of their most violent killers, feeding information to the feds while committing murder after murder after murder. The betrayal was too vast to process. The Mafia didn't threaten him. They didn't seek revenge. They didn't bother orchestrating a hit. They did something worse. They erased him. A man who once commanded fear now inspired something colder, indifference. The FBI reacted just as viciously, but with polished denials instead of bullets. They disowned him instantly. Agents claimed they barely knew him. Supervisors said he wasn't valuable. Everyone insisted the relationship had been exaggerated. Scarpa watched them lie with the same cold stare he'd once used on his victims. They weren't just distancing themselves. They were burying him alive. Both worlds, the Mafia he served and terrorized, and the FBI he manipulated and fed, were united by only one thing. Their desire to pretend Gregory Scarpa had never existed. And now, Scarpa was truly alone. The Grim Reaper, who once walked streets soaked in the blood of his enemies, now lay in a prison hospital bed, thin, pale, coughing, bones jutting through his skin, veins failing, eyes hollow. He was paranoid. He believed guards were poisoning him. He believed the Mafia was coming. He believed the FBI was plotting revenge. But no one was coming. No one cared. The world had moved on. His allies were gone. His enemies were gone. His power was gone. The silence that filled his final days was not peaceful. It was suffocating. For the first time in his life, Gregory Scarpa felt something stronger than rage or violence. He felt abandonment. He learned the truth he had spent his entire life avoiding. There is no loyalty for men with two masters. Not in the Mafia. Not in the FBI. Not in the world he carved open with his bare, bloody hands. There is nothing at the end of that road but emptiness. Nothing but consequences. Nothing but darkness. And in that cold, lonely hospital bed, the Grim Reaper finally understood the final rule, the rule he had broken every day of his life. Silence always wins in the end, and death answers to no one. If you think Scarpa's story is dark, wait until you hear the tale of the Mafia boss who fooled the world, faking insanity for decades while secretly running an empire from the shadows. That story begins the moment this one ends. Stay with me. You won't forget what comes next. If you enjoy true crime stories told like a movie, subscribe to Crime Syndicate Tales, where power always has a price.